Okay, in the interest of time, I think we should probably get started. Everybody, welcome back to the fourth and the final session of this meeting, which is Breaking Political Boundaries. Political considerations have always been relevant for archaeology in Egypt. It would be disingenuous to suggest otherwise. However, I think it's definitely the case that the 25th of January revolution and the events that are following it, that continue to follow it, have brought political issues to the forefront for scholars who are working in this field. In the months following the implosion of the Mubarak government, reports of the looting of sites, museums, and magazines created a great deal of anxiety for the safety of the material we study. At the same time, it caused real concern for the safety of friends and colleagues who are living in Egypt, and personalized the political dimension of the country in new and very immediate ways. With the apparatus of the state unable to police or to monitor many parts of the country, the fate of the archaeological sites lay mainly in the hands of the people who were occupying them. Many sites had been seen locally as a resource for income from tourism. As the tourism economy and the Egyptian economy in general failed, looting became an alternate economic strategy, although this was by no means the rule in every place, as I think we'll see. The large-scale breakdown in regional control created security problems that not only imperiled archaeological sites, but also, in the wake of evacuations and season cancellations, made many wonder if it would be feasible to continue excavation projects. Initially, this manifested as an increased interest in remote sensing, survey, and site monitoring projects, but now, 5 years out from the revolution, many projects are beginning to turn to local communities as engaged and invested custodians of archaeological sites. This long overdue recognition of the community as a vital actor in the preservation and interpretation of cultural heritage is a central concern of both of the papers in this session. And the new focus seems extremely appropriate in a country finding its way in the wake of a very difficult revolution where, not just in archaeology, popular voices are striving to break down political, social, and cultural boundaries that have stood for a very, very long time. Monica Hanna, the first of our speakers, was born in Heliopolis and did her undergraduate degree in Egyptology and archaeological chemistry at the American University in Cairo. She later went to the University of Pisa in Italy to complete her doctorate. From July 2011 until November 2012, she was a postdoctoral fellow in the Topoi Cluster of Excellence in the Department of Egyptology and North African Studies in Humboldt University. She is currently an assistant professor of cultural heritage and architecture at the Arab Academy for Science and Technology and Maritime Transport in Smart Village, Cairo and Aswan, Egypt. Her research focuses on space, knowledge, and identity of archaeological sites, with particular interest on different meanings and reflections of heritage on identity of space and communities. She's been working on a project in El Korna, Luxor, for the different narratives of the multiple worlds of the Theban necropolis and its meanings to the various stakeholders. Recently, she has been working with the media and a group of volunteers to bring publicity to the plight of various archaeological sites in Egypt, including and especially Dashur, and also Heliopolis. She has been granted the Safe Beacon Award for 2014 for her efforts in the salvage of antiquities under conflict, and was named by UNESCO the Monuments Woman of 2014. Gary Scott received his doctoral degree in Egyptology from Yale University with a special concentration in ancient Egyptian art, particularly sculpture. Dr. Scott began working in museums while he was in college and has served in both administrative and curatorial capacities at various museums, including the Yale University Art Gallery and the San Antonio Museum of Art, being both curatorial chair and interim director of the latter. Since 2003, he has been the director of the American Research Center in Egypt. So I'd like to introduce Monica for her paper, Breaking Political Boundaries of Archaeological Work in Egypt Post-2000.
Good afternoon. I'm really thankful to be here. It's my first time in Brown. And although the topic of this talk is quite depressing and grim, but I think it has a very good silver lining. So bear with me the graphic details of the looting and try to think positive about the future on how we can improve this for Egypt's cultural heritage. I'll go very quickly on what we're going to cover. We're going to cover Mataria, Abu Sir, Dashur, Abu Sir Malek, Antinopolis, and Sena, Stabla Antar. what happened at the Malawi Museum that was just inaugurated on Thursday. Unfortunately, I could not make it there. Al Fustat, and then Alexandria. We'll start by ancient Heliopolis. And as most of you know, ancient Heliopolis is situated in the most dense, demographically dense area of North Cairo. This is how it looks like today, where the Senusert obelisk is. This is what happened post 2011. People started entering. This is the main temple of Atum. They started breaking through the walls. They wanted to go appropriate the site. And I choose the word appropriate because I think this is what they think. They think that this land is no man's land, so we might as well take it. So the first thing that they do is not that they do not go directly, because probably authorities will be alert very quickly. What they do, and this is very smart, is that they change the identity of the archaeological site. So instead of us knowing all the people who live around the site, they know that this is the Temple of Atum. They turn it into a car park. So in 3, 4, 5 years, people will no longer remember that this is an archaeological site. People will remember that this is a car park. So if we take it and we decide to build on it, no one is going to object, which is exactly what happened. Part of the Temple of Atum was immediately taken, and you see these 4 or 5 buildings were immediately erected right after 2011. Same here, and if you remember, Minister Mohammed Ibrahim announced the discovery of an offering table in Matariya in 2013. Actually, this was thrown out by the land mafia. They were constructing the buildings and they found this and they thought, oh, this is too much trouble and we cannot sell it. So they turned it in to the MSA. Here is where the University of Leipzig excavates. It's the Ramesside area. And unfortunately, here on this side is a building called Soul Khamis al-Jadid. One of the problems, bear with me that I will bore you with a lot of Egyptian administration details. Soul Khamis al-Jadid is the new Thursday market. This was built on archaeological land. There was false reports that the land did not have any archaeological remains, so they could cede it to the governorate. The governorate had the huge problem, which is the Soul Khamis would block off the Midan Matariya, the Matariya square, and no traffic could go in and out. So they thought of this brilliant idea, is that if we build a new Soul Khamis, people will willingly go and sit in Soul Khamis al-Jadid and clear the traffic on Thursday. Well, so where is the empty place that we can do such an ambitious project on? It's the archaeological site. So they took this part. Funny enough, the vendors refused to relocate to Soul Khamis al-Jadid. They still block Midan Matariya every Thursday, and it's an empty building. No, it's all built on archaeological land. Then again, here, this is close to the 26th dynasty tombs, a football pitch. Well, thankfully, the football pitch does not ruin the archaeological context, but then again, it's changing the identity of the site. People will no longer remember that this was part of the 26th dynasty cemetery. People will remember this was the football pitch. And again, they started constructing modern cemeteries there, and cemeteries in Egypt are a mess, because if you construct an illegal cemetery on an archaeological site, you cannot move them, because religiously, you cannot open a tomb of a dead person. So if they're there for eternity. So we have to stop them before a single person is buried. Here, this area is called Abu al-Hul, because there is a small sphinx here, if you can see it. Unfortunately, this is what remains of the site, and you see these white bricks. Now it's a 5-story building. Last time I visited, I could not take an updated photograph because there were some thugs around and I was worried about taking out my camera. So now it's a 5-story building. Again, right on, built with no permits and on the archaeological site. Then again, this is the biggest magazine of Egyptian objects in Cairo. And suddenly, after 2011, this building reached 6 stories, and they said, the people, this is not a private building. This is a religious institute. So it's for the community. It's for the public. After the building went 6 stories, it of course opened into shops and other utilities building. Of course, it's very dangerous because it's right next to the biggest magazine that was never properly audited. We do not know how many objects are inside of this magazine, and perhaps we will not know. And I don't think there is a forecast to do any proper magazine audits in the near future. This is Ard الست فايقة. And Ard الست فايقة had very important Greco-Roman sarcophagi, mud brick structures, but it was called Ard الست فايقة because it was a property of a lady called Faiqa. Faiqa lived most of her time in Canada with her children, and she died in Canada as well. The day she died, the very next day, the land was seized and was taken by the local land mafia, although her will had stated clearly that the land should be ceded to the Ministry of Antiquities. Fortunately, because it was private property, the ministry could not do anything. They have not previously documented the sarcophagi or the mud brick structures. Here is the sun temples of the Ramesside sun temples in Mataria, and they've tried to burn the temple, I think something like 7 times by now. They always try to set it on fire, again, in an attempt to wipe out any archaeological identity of the site. Of course, there's a problem with solid waste management in the area. Nobody collects garbage there, so the only empty place they can dispose the waste is the archaeological site. And here is the gate of the son, the high priest, the son of Ramses IX. And you see they've tried to hack the blocks because, again, if they wipe out the hieroglyphics inscriptions, it's just a block. And probably the inspectors will be scared, so they will move the blocks into the magazine. And the site will no longer have visible archaeological features, so we can easily build on it. Here, this is a close image of modern day hacking out of cartouches. Again, here trying to burn it, and they also reuse the site in other illegal activities such as drug dealing, prostitution, and arms dealing as well. Here they try to destroy, again, the gate of Ramses II. They chiseled out this part. Again, they try to attack the cartouches, which how do they know that if they attack the cartouche, they attack the identity of the gate? Well, this is what they've done. Before the event of 30th of June in 2013, we knew, the inspectors in the area came and told us that the local land mafia there had sold the area of the sun temples to each other. So this person was going to take this bit of land, and this person, they already had photographs of these contracts that they did with each other. So they've divided the temple, so as soon as the protests would break, that they would go in with bulldozers, completely wipe out the site and take it. Of course, at that time, the police was irresponsive, the army was irresponsive, so the only way we thought we could save the site is by making a dawsha, a big mess. So what we did is that we called for volunteers from the area, television, press, and said we're going to clean the temple. We're going to do a youth campaign to clean the temple, and that the temple is threatened and we need media attention. And this is what we did. In one day, we brought, I think, something like 7 television channels and press people and youth from the area and from outside of the area and inspectors. That day, we cleared 9 tons of solid waste. Of course, we need to work for another 2-3 months to clear the whole waste, but it was just a stunt. We did this so that the land mafia in the area would be scared enough from attacking the site. And happily, it worked. No one dared to get close to the site because when we went to the site, of course, the police came. There was something like 15, 16 police people standing. And the protests passed without anyone actually approaching the site with a bulldozer. So this was quite a success with just very simple tools that we had in hand that time. We'll move more south to Abu Sir, and this is where Abu Sir is located in the Memphite necropolis, and Abu Sir was badly hit. Actually, the whole Memphite necropolis was badly hit with looting. I remember on the 29th, the Saturday, the 29th of January 2011, people were calling in cars with microphones, in microphones of mosques and churches, asking villagers to go out and loot. Villagers were going out to loot in picnics. You can see women taking their the lunch to the husbands who were actually digging out at the Memphite necropolis, which is the total contrary of what happened in the Theban necropolis. In the Theban necropolis, when they opened the Armant prison, all the convicts went out, but the Gurnawis came out with their sticks and small guns and protected the whole archaeological site. There was only very little looting in a place called Nagas Sawalem, and was done from people within the Gurna community. So it was very weird how at Memphis this happened, while in Thebes this happened, but I think it has to do a lot with how Thebans or Gurnawis view their livelihood in comparison to the villages around Memphis. So here we are in Abu Sir. Looting happened extensively. I remember in 2010, I read in the newspaper that a wall was going to be built around Abu Sir, and this wall would cost £34 million. Again, the wall did not protect the archaeological site. There was this obsession from 2002 until 2010, there was this obsession with constructing walls around archaeological sites. And I think that it, saved some sites, but then other sites, like Abu Sir. It did not save Abu Sir, it did not save Dahshur, it did not save many sites, because if this money was perhaps invested differently, it could have saved them at that time. Here, more looting. This is here very close to the step pyramid. This is a mud brick vaulted tomb. You can see how far from the step pyramid. So we're talking about looting right at the foot of one of the oldest stone structure in the world. Here again, more looting pits, more looting very close to the step pyramid. And not just that. In the middle of the chaos, the solid archaeological sites and solid waste management problems are quite interrelated. In the middle of the chaos, as most of you know, that the Memphite necropolis is all registered on the World Heritage List. And part of the land registered is this area called Hod al-Zuhur, or the Basin of Flowers. Funnily enough, it was turned into a landfill. You can see here the Giza pyramids. And in the middle of when no one was paying attention to the Memphite necropolis, people started dumping garbage in really large amount. It's not a local village dump site. This is a dump site from all Giza. So you need to think of all Haram, Giza, Zamalek, Muhandisin, garbage being dumped in Abu Sir. You can see here more garbage. And not just that, they even started to illegally quarry sand out of the archaeological site. And of course, this was a safe haven to transport any archaeological material looters were finding, because they can transport them in and out in these sand mines. We move more south to Dahshur, and Dahshur was, the area of the Black Pyramid in Dahshur was property of the army until 1997. When it was ceded to the ministry, to the Supreme Council of Antiquities, then it was never properly surveyed and excavated. So it was quite virgin. The noble cemetery around Dahshur was relatively untouched. So you see here, most of the burial shafts are characterized, the tombs there are characterized by a long shaft, and the side burial chamber completely raided out, as you can see. The guards in Dahshur were caught in crossfire because Dahshur was just out of control. We had gangs coming from all Egypt, organized gangs and local villagers digging in Dahshur. So many would even get killed in crossfire. We also had children that were being taken to dig in these shafts because they're small and agile, that were dying and being sanded over. So Dahshur was a big mess for a very long time. And if you look at satellite images, This was Dahshur in 2009. This is here the pyramid. This is the modern cemetery. In 2010, we already had 5 pits, so people started actually being interested in looting there. In May 2011, these were the amounts of looting pits around the Dahshur pyramid. And here in 2012. And then, as Gregory said this morning, the Ministry of Antiquities just sanded in these pits without any documentation, salvage archaeology, or even taking note or mapping these looting pits. And not just that, when it's a lawless place, people again start thinking of construction. A local contractor came and took over the causeway of the southern pyramid of Senefru and started building a cemetery. And as you know, again, cemeteries are untouchable in Egypt. Once they're in place for good. You can see here the Red Pyramid and these cemeteries. Of course, we've stopped further construction of the cemeteries, but they have not yet been removed. We do not know if anyone is buried because we made a huge dawsha, a huge mess, when they were being constructed. And even this man thought that he could take the area of the mortuary temple of Senefru and cultivate it, and he was bringing water on his donkey every day to start the cultivation. Poor man. Well, this is the silver lining. The community of Dahshur said that we're not happy with this. We're not all looters. The village is called Manshed Dahshur. And they called us and said, we want to do a protest against the looting. And so they came, and we stood together, again brought press and television. And immediately, the very next day, the army point close to Dahshur dispatched a patrolling car, and looting stopped. It still happens until today, but at a much lower scale. There are no longer organized gangs working in Dahshur. Still looting is ongoing, but it's not at the same very high rate that was happening in 2013. We move more south to Abu Sir al-Malik, and Abu Sir al-Malik is here between, it's very close to Maydoum. It's between El-Wasta in Beni Suef and Fayoum. There's a canal that connects Fayoum with Beni Suef, and it's right on the apex of the canal. And Abu Sir al-Malik was never properly studied. It's a 500-acre archaeological site. We have Naqada 2 pottery coming out of the site. Up until that, we know that Al-Khalifa al-Marwan of Al-Abbasid dynasty was actually killed at the monastery right in Abu Sir al-Malik. And if you've ever visited the Museum of Islamic Art in Cairo, there used to be this, it's still there, it was not broken when it was bombed. There is a very big glass jug coming from Abu Sir al-Malik. It also has Hyksos burials. It had a cult for Anubis. It has Greco-Roman, Christian burials. So it's a very, very, very rich archaeological site that was never properly excavated. So of course, it turned into a Swiss cheese. People were going, the way I found about Abu Sir al-Malik is that I was visiting Fayoum. And on the way back from Fayoum, I took the western Said Road, and I sat on a shisha bar, a coffee place. And probably they thought I'm not Egyptian. So a man came and approached me and said, I have ushabtis if you want to buy. So I said, where did you get them from? He said, he was very straightforward. He told me, there is an archaeological site right here. We all go and try to find food for our children. This is what he exactly said. So I asked him to show me the site, and it's really very close to the highway road. I went, it's in the middle of the village, and this is what I found. Sarcophagi broken everywhere. The whole site is raided. And actually, there were police reports that there were arrests being done in Beni Suef of people with colored sarcophagi. So that made the connection of where the colored sarcophagi were coming from. Here again, inscribed tombs being cut out. We really could not find the name for the owner of the tomb. Mummies completely ripped off. They tried to find amulets, jewelry, heart scarabs, anything that they can sell. And the looters of the village. In Abu Sir al-Malik, I noted two types of looters. There's the organized gangs, because we can see their lunchboxes left on the site. They come, they're very organized, they clean a few tombs once at a time, and they come with their lunchboxes, and they're very organized. While the others are the villagers, and in order that the villagers do not get arrested with the loot, they hide the loot on site. So they keep the loot in one of the shafts, and they characterize it. This is the loot of this family, and this is loot of this family, and they do not cross. Here again, pieces of sarcophagi left behind. The ghafir of the site was actually making tea out of the wood of these sarcophagi. Bones. This is legs of a mummy. Cartonnage. Faces. Feet of a mummy. What we could do for Abu Sir al-Malik is that no one cared about it. It was this site in the middle of nowhere. It raised no scholarly attention. And what we knew from the communities there is around 25 children have died from 2011 to 2013. Again, they were using children to go down the shafts to find objects. So this is one of the kids, for example, that would come. They would have objects in their pockets, bead nets, little ushabtis, little amulets to sell. And you can even buy like a little ushabti for 20 pounds, 50 pounds. It's really, it was insane. And what we could manage to do as independent scholars and people working with the Egypt Heritage Task Force is that we try to give attention to Abu Sir al-Malik. So there was nothing in our hands except to enlist it on the World Monument Watch. And we successfully listed it for 2016, and we hope that we will do more activities there to raise awareness of site desecration. Again, the Ministry of Antiquities handed over many of these objects. They even hid the broken sarcophagi without no archaeological recording or even photographs. I think I'm the only person who has photographs of what happened in Abu Sir al-Malik. We move more south to Antinopolis in Sheikh Abaida, and it's in Minya. Minya is my hometown, so I've given more attention there because I had the networks. I could know how to navigate. I would get phone calls from relatives around that this person is looting, there's looting here. So this was the network that we were working on. So after the revolution, the site is 1,024 fedans, and it was not registered until 2012. We've managed to get a Prime Minister decree to register the whole site as the Italian-American satellite images just in 2012. So before that, anything that was even happening outside of the borders, the police could not do a verbal against it because it was not antiquities land. This is the Description de l'Egypte. You can see these two columns. These are these two columns today in the building. So tells you how fast the landscape of Sheikh Abaida is changing. These are the images of the Italian-American mission right before 2011. So the block was gone after 2011. Here, this is the biggest hippodrome in Egypt in Sheikh Abaida, and the only parallel is that of Circus Maximus in Rome. And again, they started building Islamic tombs on them. Here, this is Deir el-Hawa, and then this is what happened in it after 2011. Same here. So this is the problems, that looters do not go like us with trowels and brushes. They actually go with bulldozers, with big hoes. They try to find anything that they can sell. So people, when they tell me, well, thank God you don't have ISIS in Egypt, I tell them looters are doing the exact same thing that ISIS is doing to the archaeological sites in Syria and Iraq. Here again, and of course, informal construction on the site. And the looters, here are the chaps. These are the looters. These are the ones who go out and loot. The problem with Sheikh Abaida is that it's on a very thin stretch of the Nile. And the village is growing. There is no chances for development. There's no factory. There's no... the agricultural land is limited. So people have really nowhere to work. The only place for them to work is to go and find coins, parchment, little statues, little amulets that they can sell on the antiquities market. Here, and if you chase them, they usually run away. North of Sheikh Abaida, there's a Coptic site called Deir Abu Hinnis, or Ansina, and it's characterized by this rock-cut church in the mountain. Beneath it, and there are also some Egyptian architectural elements from the Amarna period. Beneath the decorated church is a keep. And people in Deir Abu Hinnis, the monks there used to copy manuscripts. So the keep is formed of little libraries, looks like a catacomb where they could keep the different manuscripts. Unfortunately, many people who work in Deir Abu Hinnis work also in the quarries in Minya, so they have access to dynamite. So they brought the dynamite, and if you can see, these are dynamite holes. They tried to dynamite the keep in order to find the treasure behind. You can see here, this is a very clear dynamite blow-up. And it's very funny because we always hear of sectarian problems in Egypt, but in Deir Abu Hinnis, the locals there go bring the sheikh from Sheikh Abaida to help them find the treasure. So the Copts call on the Islamic sheikh to come look for the treasure. So it's insane there. Here again, another dynamite hacking out of Coptic inscriptions, illegal excavations. This was being prepared to be cut out and sold on the market. It was gone the following time I went. This too will probably go away. And in Ansina al-Qibleya, there are the different monastic settlements. They're completely being destroyed. They're made of mud brick, and the archaeological mission that used to work there has not had their permission since, I think, 2010 or something. So the site is being completely destroyed. And also agricultural expansion coming to the site. And you see how thin is the strip of land between Deir Abu Hinnis and Sheikh Abaida. So people really have nowhere to go. They have no job. So the only place they can go for is the archaeological site. We move to Establa Antar. Most of the cat mummies were disturbed. They think they will find a huge treasure to sell. Of course, the cat mummies probably do not sell for a lot of money. We go to the Malawi Museum. The Malawi Museum was broken into on the 14th of August 2013. My father is originally from Malawi, so I used to visit this museum since I was a little kid. I had a very strong emotional tie to this place. So when I heard that the Malawi Museum was attacked, I tried to contact many people, and I managed to get the register of the objects. Of course, it was in Arabic. We had many colleagues. We had Catherine Banzi from University of Chicago helping us translate it into English, and we've immediately dispersed an English version of the registrar of the museum to all the different authorities so they can keep an eye of the objects. On the 17th of August, I got a phone from the chief of the museums in the Ministry of Antiquities telling me, did anyone send you photographs of the museum? And I told him, no. Didn't anyone from the ministry go check out the museum? It was looted for 3 days. And he told me no, because the security situation is not good. I immediately took a friend of mine, she's a journalist, and we took a car to Malawi. This was, of course, the museum before it was. This is how I saw the museum as soon as I entered. It was 5 p.m. on the 17th of August. This was the museum, completely devastated. Mummies were burnt. Here again. These were 5 very beautiful sarcophagi coming from Tel Sharona, and we have other 5 sarcophagi coming from the same place. They're in the Museum of Tanta. And again, here, this mummy was completely burnt. It was this mummy that it was completely destroyed. And this was a Greco-Roman statue as well. There was still fire ongoing in the nearby facility of the civil unit. There were 13 Demotic papyri I found this one. I also found an intact one that I did not know what to do, because you're in the middle of everyone shooting, and if I take the Demotic Papyrus and step out of the museum, I will get arrested or I will get shot and the papyrus stolen. So I managed to hide it until the next day, and we found it intact. I'll show you the photograph. Basketry. And again, it was these kids at the museum running with statues of Osiris or whatever they could take from the museum. And when I was there, I told them, why are you doing that? And one of the kids said, because ده بتاع الحكومة. This belongs to the government. And I hate the government, so I'm getting even with the government by destroying the museum. Of course, it was useless to tell him that this is your museum, you can come and see it, and they would not listen. So the next morning, I came back with Abdessamia Farghali, who was the chief of antiquities police there. And we had Gamal Salim, the head of the museums, and it was only the three of us and a few policemen. And as soon as we came from Minya, as soon as we approached Malawi, we heard shooting for around 15 minutes, that we could not enter the site. And then we waited, and then shooting continued for 2 hours. When we finally entered, we realized that a man was getting his daughter married, so they were putting her furniture on a truck. He started shooting 2 bullets. The police were alarmed, so they started shooting at the man, and then the terrorists started shooting at the police, and we had crossfire for 2 hours for no absolute reason. We, alhamdulillah, managed to get to the museum. This was how it was back then. We collected as many fragments as we could. We moved the remains. That day we removed around 46 objects, so we saved 46 objects out of 1,089 that were looted. Here is the saved Demotic Papyrus. I've managed to hide it well from the looters until the next day. Again, broken sarcophagi, animal sarcophagi. And what was the nice thing there is that although some personnel of the museum were too scared to come, we had youth coming from something called Salon Malawi Saqafi, or the Malawi Cultural Salon, and they were young men and women coming to give us a hand. They said, we knew what happened and we'd like to come and help you. And they brought boxes, they brought cotton, they brought many other things to help us, and we've managed to move the stuff to Al Ashmonain. We moved to Al Fustat, and Al Fustat is the oldest Islamic capital of Egypt. It was going to be given to the governor of Cairo to be turned into a public garden. Thankfully, after so much fuss that we managed to make, the governor changed plans. But then again, it was not planned, it was not intended to be a garden, of course. The story was we changed the identity of the site. It's no longer the city of Fustat, it's a public garden. And then in 3-4 years, buildings will come on it. We moved very quickly to Al Abd Theatre in Alexandria, and the problem of Al Abd Theatre is that it's private, the land is privately owned, but of course the law, the Antiquities law allows the Ministry of Antiquities to take the site if it's of archaeological significance. As you can see, we have found very few parallels for this Mediterranean site. It released very interesting structures and objects. And the contractor, in one night, on Wednesday last April, completely sanded the archaeological site. He came with bulldozers, and overnight, they had destroyed the site. So there is no longer archaeological context. We lost the site, and of course now, if we re-excavate the site, most of the structures will be completely lost. So then, it's no longer archaeological. And he wins, and he takes back his site. The Oasis, the Western Desert Oasis, also suffered huge looting, burials completely disturbed. Here, this is in Bahariya, this is in Dakhla Oasis in Ma'asara North. Sheikh Wali in Dakhla. Mommy is completely devastated in search for anything to sell. Of course, nothing documented of this. I'm usually asked, how can we all help? And I say, as heritage practitioners, help Egyptian colleagues through educational resources, academic support, and collaborative salvage archaeology projects. publish academically and write for the public more on how looting is destroying world heritage. Work with Egyptian authorities on creating public awareness campaigns on how unethical it is to buy looted heritage objects. And as the general public, people passionate about heritage, we need to tweet, post, and share. Social media has an excellent power in campaigning for heritage. Spread the word with those not on the social media. Get in touch with friends in the media and send them the stories. Report any antiquities shop, gallery, or jeweler that you think is selling antiquities to us. We work directly with the antiquities police in Egypt. Work together with heritage practitioners on creating a strong ethical code on trading historical art. Protecting world heritage is a shared responsibility where each citizen of the world needs to actively take part. I'll finish by this quote from the book of Monuments Men. It says, "You can wipe out an entire generation, you can burn their homes to the ground, and somehow they'll find their way back. But if you destroy their history, you destroy their achievements, then as if they've never existed." And thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I have a tendency to touch a button and so what I think should be there suddenly disappears, so I thought I'd get some assistance. So thank you very much. This is not my first time at Brown. The first time I was at Brown was actually kind of a charming little story. I was my first year of graduate school in Yale University. Ricardo Caminos was an Egyptologist here. We were both in Boston for an evening reception for Egyptologists. And he found out I had to go back to New Haven be in New Haven the next morning. I was driving back that night and said, "Well, do you think I could get a ride with you?" And I said, "Of course, I'd be delighted to." And we pulled into Brown well after midnight. And by way of showing me his appreciation for my gesture, I got a tour of Wilbur Hall at about 1 o'clock in the morning. And he proudly proclaimed, taking me all through it, that he had a Verter book on every single floor. So that was my first introduction to Brown. Also, I would be remiss as Director of RC if I didn't thank Jim and everyone here at Brown for your kind welcoming of RC a few years back for the annual meeting. It was one of our best ever, so that was very nice indeed. I'm going to hope that my presentation today is a little bit lighter than the one we just sat through. A very good presentation, but depressing in a way. I hope that we'll have a slightly more positive story to tell. And I thank the organizers for asking me to describe some of our work in Egypt that we're doing in terms of outreach to the community. And this is a way in which, in a general sense, the disciplines of archaeology and Egyptology have a contemporary crossover or contact with the economic, political, tourism, and community outreach sectors. I think that probably most of you or have a knowledge of the American Research Center of Egypt, but I'm going to take just a second for those of you who may not be familiar with us. We were founded in 1948, initially to represent American scholars to the Egyptian government and the Egyptian government back to American scholars, which means we're almost 70 years old. We, in the 1960s, expanded to fellowships, both for graduate students who were finishing their dissertation work and to senior scholars on sabbatical. And then in the 1990s, we began to work in the heritage sector through significant USAID grants, United States Agency for International Development, and that partnership is now 20 years old. Our partnership with USAID has centered into three basic areas. Initially, it was training and monument conservation. And now we have expanded outward to include job creation, and that's one of the things that we'll be talking about today. The project began, we had a comment about the contrast between moist and dry, and that was certainly how this project began. USAID conducted a groundwater lowering project at the Karnak Temple and Luxor temples and asked RC to come in as a follow-on to do monitoring because no one knew quite what would happen when the pumps were turned on. and also then to conduct conservation projects and do some training. So this is how we got into this particular project. And this was, of course, before the Egyptian Revolution. One of the places that we concentrated was the Khonsu Temple, which provided a great training facility because it was under visited, still is not visited heavily, and presented in a sort of microcosm all of the problems that were to be encountered in the temple, in a larger temple context. So we used it as a wonderful training facility. We built a modern conservation lab right next to it, disguising it with mud brick so it looks like it's part of the fabric of the temple. The conservation lab has training facilities, which you see here with one of our lead conservators training a group of Egyptian students. We took, in the 3 years that we did this particular part of the program, we trained over 70 Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities conservators. These are all building conservators. And then next door to that, in the same building, is a space with laboratory space where we have basic conservation tools and equipment, nothing so challenging that it couldn't be maintained, and this is always something that's important. And so with this, RC really created the first fully functioning conservation lab in Upper Egypt, the one at Aswan, sadly never quite taking off. One of the things that we did was to make sure that we were creating lime mortar because obviously the cement, the old cement that was used to patch, seals monuments, helps the percolating salt come up and helps break the building apart. So we've removed concrete and replaced it with lime mortar. Here you can see that process going on with one of our conservation students up on scaffolding at the Khonsu Temple. We also did a good deal of cleaning, trained our conservators in cleaning of the interior chapels. And then the Egyptian Revolution came. And I decided to try to pick one of the nicer pictures that I recovered from that space. RC Cairo office is a block and a half away from Tahrir Square. So we had ringside seats for the whole thing. And it was interesting how many times I got to whiff tear gas. In any case, the revolution came. RC has stepped in a couple places to help afterwards. One was when l'Institut de l'Egypte's library was set on fire. We partnered with the Library of Congress through the embassy and brought a conservation specialist, got them equipment, helped them salvage what they could of their library. Again, when in February 2014, when the Islamic Museum suffered in the bomb blast that was meant for the police depot, we stepped in and were the first to respond with a grant from the embassy and USAID. And it was decided that in my 30 years in museums, I was in the museum. I did not show slides. It was actually heartbreaking. I've never seen such a devastation in a museum setting. In the library section, the manuscript library, which is on the second floor, it was like being in an 18th century naval battle. There were huge pieces of sharpened wood that were just thrown across and jammed into a place on the opposite side of the building. So a telephone or a lamppost that burst right through the front door, lying inside smash cases. It was really devastating. In any case, it was decided that the first step that RC could take and should take was to try to secure the building so it was safe for people to go in and work. And so we worked on the facade and the exterior, and that project is now over. We're waiting for them to reopen the museum, which we understand that President Sisi has to do, so we're not quite sure when that will happen. As a result of the revolution, though, I'm happy to say, as Monica noted, there are some areas that survived pretty well, and Luxor was one of them, and RC's work in Luxor continued unabated throughout the entire period. We kept basically on our schedule and continued working. Here you see our conservators working in Chapel 6 at the Khonsu Temple. There was actually a heartwarming story in Luxor when there was an attempt by actually a guard to loot the place, and the local population turned out and got the guy and defeated the whole scheme, and Karnak remained safe. So it was a heartwarming story. And also Chapel 11, we continue these things today. So the project, one of the projects that we have undertaken, and the one that I will spend most of my time discussing today, deals with community outreach and helping people understand that they do have an investment in antiquity sites. And this is one of the things I think that is increasingly called for and needed in Egypt to try to bridge the cultural gap there is between so much of the population and their cultural heritage that they live around. I think, if you'll pardon me, that Egypt is not like Greece or Italy, where there is a population that feels a connection to their past in every sense. It needs education. It needs community outreach from those of us who value the cultural heritage. Obviously, there are Egyptians like Monica and her team and her students who very much care very deeply about it, but the wider population really does need to have a better sense of what goes on. Well, Luxor was really devastated economically because, of course, it is a town that depends almost entirely on tourism and tourism revenue. To give you a sense of this, we started this project in 2012. In 2013, hotel occupancy in Luxor was 2%. When we did this project throughout 2013, it continues today, but throughout 2013, Little RC was the largest single private employer in Luxor. So we really made a difference. One of the things we tried to do just before the revolution, the army came in with their bulldozers and got the village of Gourna. They did not do a particularly delicate destruction, but rather left things in terrible shape with debris everywhere. We felt that it was worth trying to do what we could to improve that so that future visitors to the site, when tourism comes back, would have a better experience. So we conducted a cleanup, basically, which involved basically day laborers. John Shearman is my associate director who handled the project. This is almost like an old WPA project in a sense. And he was very sensitive about sharing the wealth, so that he made sure that there was only one family member per family that RC employed to diversify the income distribution as much as we possibly could. It basically consisted of removing rubble and rubbish from the sites that had been left from the demolition, as well as laying new pathways and signage. So we've tried to improve the site greatly. You can see the remains of the houses, and having seen the site after when it had recently been bulldozed was really another sort of heartrending experience. In addition to the day laborers, we also use semi-skilled labor. As I mentioned, we've tried to put in pathways. Here you can see some dry stone masons setting cornerstones to line the paths that people not going to drive or walk on to get to various tombs that otherwise were fairly inaccessible. Here, putting in pavement. And then a minor industry has been a mud brick industry, where we took the used mud brick from the demolished houses and structures and repurposed it, refashioned it. These are used not only in RC facilities or RC projects, but also by our colleagues at Chicago House, by an Italian mission, and by several others who work in Luxor. We stamp each brick so that it will be quite evident not only who did the work, but also that it's modern brick for someone who will come by later. So that's been a minor industry. To give you a sense of the contribution to job creation in this region, this just is a chart of one of our seasons, where, again, I'll read it through for you, but you can follow along. We wanted to target 650 we wanted to employ 650 workers. We actually got 704. Initially, we planned for 18 months duration. We got it through to 20. We hadn't really thought about how many workers we'd wind up training these sort of semi-skilled jobs. That was 120. We'd set a 47 goal for the training conservators. We trained 61. We weren't sure how many archaeologists we'd get. We trained 35 in archaeology field schools. And we trained the first field photographers for the ministry that I know of that are working for them. In terms of the support of small business, we had sent that as one of our goals so that there would be a trickle-down effect. So we did buy as much as we possibly could in Egypt and as much as we possibly could locally in Luxor. all of the data that we retrieved. We mapped the entire spaces that we've worked in. If there has been archaeological material, we've recovered it. Most importantly, for someone who is a cultural anthropologist and wants to come back someday, we've also recorded all of the stuff that we found from Gurna, which included everything from photographs of people that were left behind to magical incantations, little spells back at people. We also used, one of our archaeologists used the laborers as informants, and so we knew who was living in what part of the Gurna and where their family connections were. So again, some cultural anthropologists should come in at some point and put that material to good work. USAID liked very much what we did, and they gave us a further grant. And you can see that while the numbers, we decided we were going to do a project at Medina Habu for Ray, which we did. We targeted 100, wound up with 89, but that was balanced by employing more workers to do work at Karnak, where the inspectorate found additional things for us to do, including repairing their AC unit. I mentioned this trickle-down effect, and here you can see part of it. This is a tea vendor who came out, who obviously tracked our laborers' break times and came out and sold tea and light refreshments and that sort of thing. And so, of course, he made money from our men, and he passed that on, obviously, to other people in not only his family, but other businesses in Luxor. So we tried to have a wider effect economically than we otherwise might have. I'm going to look at the site of Theban Tomb 110, just because this is where we did our more specialized training for professionals who are employed by the Ministry of Antiquities. And here we worked mainly with archaeological teams and with conservators. In this case, we took archaeologists who had been part of former RC field schools and had therefore considerable training, as well as conservators who had also worked with former RC field schools and brought them back as instructors. So this was actually the first time that RC conducted its training sessions totally in Arabic, because of course the trainers were all Egyptian. So it was an accomplishment for us. The Tomb 110 was damaged heavily in antiquity. There was a huge fire in there, which chemically altered the pigment. I walked inside it and thought, well, this is a good place to train, because how could we do any harm? I had very low hopes for what would come out, and I was actually very pleasantly surprised. Here you can see TT110 with the conservators working inside it. The walls were absolutely blackened. This is a technique that our lead conservator chose, which was which was almost like a reverse photographic sense. In other words, it's almost a negative. So they've cleaned the soot away around the hieroglyphs, so that the hieroglyphs actually stand out away from. That's the soot that's making them readable and stand out from the back. Our archaeologists were trained in various techniques. Here you can see our team members recording the small finds from the TT110 area. We employed an osteologist because we found lots of osteological material. And after this training project, our conservators have now moved on. Our advanced conservators have now moved on to other tombs, 2 Ramesside tombs in the Abu al-Naga region. There's a political side of all of this, which is also important, because, of course, this is money that's coming from the American taxpayer and government money through USAID, and it's been an important way in which we've tried to mend some of the political fences that were damaged between the U.S. and Egypt as a result of the revolution. Our ambassador, Stephen Beecroft, is a fellow in the blue plaid shirt. He's visiting our site. Here he's looking at the archaeological material at TT110. And here the osteological material. To his left is Ambassador David Thorne, who is the senior advisor to Secretary of State Kerry. This was a very important visit for him, because he was very disgruntled and discouraged about Egypt, and was really sort of encouraging Secretary Kerry to not bother with Egypt. And it was actually as a result of this particular trip, here's the USAID mission director, that he went back with very positive feelings about what RC could do. And this was a really nice opportunity for RC to bring together U.S. government officials and Egyptian government officials. Here you can see the two U.S. ambassadors to your left and the rather distinguished-looking woman looking at the work. In the center is the Egyptian Minister of International Cooperation. This was the first time that she and her associate, who's sitting here in black, had actually visited an RC site, and they were very impressed not only with the training that we were providing for professionals, but just for the economic assistance we were giving to Luxor. So there's a very positive meeting all the way around. That also had a press conference that was held within the Karnak Temple, where our ambassadors made a point of speaking to Egyptian television about their own feelings about the desirability of bringing tourism back to Egypt, and the American government's interested in trying to help. Other positive things have been, of course, that we trained a good team of Egyptian archaeologists and a good team of Egyptian conservators, who are shown here with the ambassador at the very back. And at the end of the program, they all got their certificates here. You can see the celebration with family members. Finally, TT-110 was opened by the ambassador. I'm going to take just a brief tag on for another form of community outreach, and this will be a very brief overview. We obviously heard Betsy's presentation earlier, and she's been a delight to work with. One of our absolutely best project directors we've ever had, and her dedication to Red Monastery has been an inspirational for all of us. This is the nave of the Red Monastery. We saw the chapel, the three-couch church that she worked on. This is the nave, which has not been worked on yet, or we've begun to work on. And we're going to use this not only because our remains of wall paintings here. So our Italian team will clean the wall paintings, but they'll also use it as a training facility this time and work with Egyptian colleagues. So again, a reminder of the interior of the church. But also as an outreach, we have decided that how do you help maintain these things, and how do you impart their significance to the local community? And we've decided to do this with a group of an interfaith group of young women that we have hired. We are training them. You can see our trainer kneeling in the center with the white shirt on, Dina Bakum. The project's being overseen by Michael Jones, who's sewn in the blue shirt, and of course, Abuna Antonius has charge of the monastery and is welcome to the project. The idea is to create interpreters for the site who will reach out to the citizenry of Sohag, but also to the Coptic faithful who come as pilgrims, which are by far and away the largest visitors to the site. And then when Western tourism comes back, we hope that will pick up again. They visited the White Monastery as well, so they get a sense of what's going on. They have talks with our Italian team of conservators to understand the work that's going on, so that they in turn can help interpret it back. There's fairly intensive classroom work, and there's also time for them to share their experiences with the Abuna. Again, it was important to involve, I felt it was important to involve our government so they could see the kinds of things that we do, and the ambassador was happy to be there and sort of add his support to this initiative. Finally, there can be some unexpected results when you do this kind of work. One of the last things we ever wanted to do was to find anything. And in March 2015, we did. We found two previously unknown 18th dynasty tombs, and I thought it might be kind of fun to just close with these. This is the opening to one of them. The wires coming out of it were how we managed to photograph the interior. This gives you a shot. This is this was a tomb owned by Amenhotep, whose nickname was Rebu. He was a doorkeeper at the Karnak Temple, as was his son Samut, who we discovered next door. You can see that it's got a fair amount of pigment still left, and that the paint is actually pretty nice. The false door stela and the couple. You can also see that it was damaged by Akhenaten's people who went through to make sure that Amen was not there. So I'm afraid poor Amenhotep and his wife Sat Amen have both lost their names. You can see also that it has funerary depictions. And this funerary depiction also, would draw your attention to the figure at the far left, which I think is very interesting. It's Osiris Khentiamentiu, shown as human and not as mummiform, which is kind of nice. It has a nice painted ceiling as well. This is a tomb of his son Samut, which is in some cases, although smaller in some cases, is even better preserved. There are details showing the couple, and another detail showing just really how lovely and well preserved the painting is here. We think because of the large number of mummy parts and funereal objects that are on the floor, that this may well have served as a reburial site, but also based on some things that we found in the courtyard, we think this also might have been a mortuary station in the late period. But I'll leave that to others to talk about. Finally, we've been responsible. We have installed security doors until we decide and the ministry decides what they want to do with the site. So, thank you all very much.
Thank you. I would now like to introduce our discussant, Robert Purcell, who's the director of the Hafenreffer Museum of Anthropology and professor of anthropology here at Brown. He's trained as an anthropological archaeologist. He is particularly interested in the relationships of archaeology and society. His fieldwork projects include the archaeology of a utopian community in Massachusetts, that's the Brook Farm Project, and a post-Pueblo revolt community in New Mexico. He received his doctorate from UCLA in 1988, and he was a member of Jim Hill's Pajarito Archaeological Research Project. He also received a postdoc at Carbondale in 1989 and organized a conference on the processual and post-processual debate. In 1990, he took an assistant position at the University of Pennsylvania, and he was made Sally and Alvin V. Shoemaker Professor of Anthropology in 2009. He's curator in charge of the American section at the University of Pennsylvania Museum of Anthropology and Archaeology from 2010 to 2012. Okay.
Thank you very much. I'd like to preface my remarks by thanking Laurel, Miriam, and Jen for the invitation, and Darcy as well for just introducing me, for their invitation to participate in this wonderful workshop and for giving me the opportunity to comment on these two fascinating papers by Monica and Jerry. I hope I can do them justice. There was so much material just presented and so many different sites that my ability to actually engage with their presentations will be somewhat limited. As was mentioned, I'm a Southwestern archaeologist by training, particularly interested in indigenous responses to colonial practices, particularly the archaeology of the Pueblo Revolt of 1680. I have a long-standing research project with Coach de Pueblo that I hope is a good example of collaborative research and practice. And many of the goals of the project have been established in consultation with the Coach de Pueblo Tribal Council. I've worked with high school interns on the project. I've worked with elders. We've done videotape. We've done oral history. I'm also an advocate of pragmatic archaeology, an approach that Steve Mrzowski and I have defined as the explicit integration of archaeology and its social context in ways that serve contemporary human needs. So why am I commenting on a group of papers related to Egyptian heritage? Well, as some of you know, I have a long-standing interest in Egyptology dating back to my high school days in Philadelphia when I volunteered as one of Charlie Detweiler's mummy dusters in the Egyptian section of the Penn Museum. The highlights of my job were actually rehousing the magnificent Meroitic pottery collection collected by David Randall MacGyver and Leonard Woolley as part of the museum's Eckley B. Cox expedition. I continued my interest as a Penn undergraduate, and as a senior, I actually took an independent study on Middle Egyptian with David Silverman. He had just arrived at the University of Pennsylvania and just finished his dissertation on questions in Middle Egyptian, and actually it was eventually published, I think, through Undine Press. After graduation, I enrolled in a master's program at the University of Chicago, where I actually studied Middle Egyptian with Klaus Baer, and studied with Egyptian religion with Ed Wente. And Helene Cantor was my MA thesis advisor. I wrote on basically Egyptian cylinder seals during the pre-dynastic period. I was interested in trade and exchange from Mesopotamia to Egypt, back and forth, as reflected by cylinder seals. Although I eventually chose to focus on Southwestern archaeology with Jim Hill at UCLA, I kept my language interests alive at UCLA, taking late Egyptian and Coptic with John Callender. So these are my Egyptological credentials, such as they are, kind of language focused, and I have to say I haven't had much chance to use them since my graduate student days, but I like to think my archaeology has been influenced by the philological tradition, the importance of language, and as I write about semiotics and archaeology, language plays a very important role in that. So let me begin my commentary on Monica and Gary's paper with some general observations about the boundaries of contemporary heritage discourse. As we all know, universal or world heritage is the idea that some places, usually defined as monuments, groups of buildings, or sites, have such compelling significance to all of humankind that they are to be preserved for the benefit of future generations. This view is embodied in the preamble of the World Heritage Convention concerning the protection of the world cultural and natural heritage in 1972. It is a basis and rationale for the World Heritage List that currently identifies over 1,000 properties, of which about 815 are cultural, 203 are natural, and 35 are mixed. So they make these distinctions, as you know, between natural and cultural. Similarly, the idea of national heritage or patrimony specifies that there are places of national significance associated with important people, historic events, or aesthetic values that warrant preservation on behalf of the citizenry. English heritage, for example, exists to make sure that, quote, the best of the past is kept to enrich the lives of English citizens today and in the future. This is from their website. Here, heritage is used as a technology to give social values material permanence and thus facilitate the continuity of contemporary social forms and institutions. Now, historically, heritage discourse has always involved the push and pull of universal and national interests. For example, the Athenian Acropolis is both a site representing the World Heritage idea and a site embodying the Greek nation itself. Tanaja Razik has recently examined the tension between these two forms of heritage in the context of her analysis of local tourist guidebooks. She finds, not surprisingly, that their narratives emphasize the Acropolis as a global tourist attraction that both represents and belongs to Greece rather than to the world. This tension is similarly illustrated in the controversy over the Parthenon Metopes. The British Museum, as we know, claims on the behalf of the entire world as a universal museum, that they hold it for the benefit of the world, versus the Greek government's claim that it represents Greek heritage and the demand that they be repatriated and installed in the new Parthenon Museum. Now, heritage discourse has always required managing competing national interests as well, and we can point to examples like the bust of Nefertiti, and we know a little bit about the history of this. Zahi Hawass arguing that the Egyptian authorities were misled by Ludwig Borchardt's export of the bust in 1913. And of course, he demanded that Germany prove that it was removed illegally. The Supreme Council of Antiquities made a series of formal requests to the Prussian Cultural Heritage Foundation demanding the bust to be returned. And the foundation has refused up to this point, and the German culture minister, Bernd Naumann, asserted that Germany is the lawful owner and Egypt has no legal grounds for the return. There is, of course, an interesting history to all of this, going back to really when the bust when the bust actually was first displayed in 1924. In 1928, Egypt offered to exchange other artifacts for the bust, but Germany declined. And of course, in 1933, Hermann Göring apparently considered returning the bust as a political gesture, but was vetoed by Hitler, of all people. So this history actually draws attention to how a singular object can come to embody national interests that obviously continue to be played out today. In the last decade, heritage discourse has broadened to include the interests of indigenous and non-Western peoples, and this has caused a reassessment of Western heritage-related concepts. As Lynn Meskel puts it, quote, we should recognize that not all individuals, groups, or nations share those views of universal heritage or have the luxury or of affluence to indulge these desires. She also notes that, quote, we uncritically hold that heritage, specifically world heritage, must be a good thing, and thus find it difficult to comprehend groups who support counterclaims, whether for the reason of religious, moral, economic, or political nature. Counterclaims to heritage can be clearly seen in the repatriation debates, many of which I'm familiar with in the New World, especially NAGPRA in North America, but also Australia, Canada, and New Zealand. NAGPRA in particular has given rise to new concepts of ownership for us to consider, community ownership as opposed to private property, and new categories of evidence to be weighed, oral history versus archaeology, for example. Now, the Egyptian case, described so well by Monica and Gary, is a case study for the struggle of a study of the struggles involved in the democratization of heritage discourse. So we see here world heritage interests with respect to preservation, access, national interests with respect to tourism, in conflict, and both being challenged by heritage claims with respect to identity, resistance from local villagers and communities, different kinds of communities. Monica shows this quite clearly in her paper, and she properly notes that the current challenges of Egyptian heritage are largely the result of 200 years of Western intervention. This has caused heritage to become a commodity, and its consumption has been limited to Western tourists, scholars, and the Egyptian elite. The effect of this intervention has been that the majority of the Egyptian people have been alienated from their own heritage. Lynn Meskel provides a vivid example of this in her discussion of the relocation of the village of Gurna to make way for tourism in the Valley of the Kings. This move was resisted by townspeople and resulted in actual violence. Monica's presentation documents the destruction that followed upon the 2011 and the attacks on the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. Entire villages participated in the looting of the Memphite necropolis close to Abu Sir, Saqqara, Dasht, and Lisht. And at the same time, she sees a new form, and actually she represents herself, a new form of cultural advocacy. She notes that regular citizens formed a human belt around the Egyptian Museum until the early hours of the morning until armed forces could be deployed for the protection of the museum. She also notes that armed locals at Al-Buarait and Al-Qurna protected the archaeological sites in the Theban necropolis when the convicts were released from the Armad prison. She talks about how the villagers of Dashur protested successfully against the looting of the site there. New grassroots organizations are beginning to be created to address this situation, and her organization, Egyptian Heritage Task Force, is one of the leaders in this area. She has been actively involved in campaigning for the protection of sites such as Abu Sir al-Malak, which she mentioned here in her presentation. She and the task force literally fought off armed looters that were attacking the Malawi Museum. And they've also produced films of on-site vandalism and communicated their concerns through social media. So when she asked us to participate in social media, she's only asking us to do what she's already doing to enhance the scope of it. Significantly, the ministry has consulted with her and the task force on various solutions to manage the site of Abu Sir al-Malak. And as she mentioned, that it's now listed on the World Monument Watch for 2016. This is significant because the ministry no longer sees the task force as a competitor and is taking it on board as a partner in the process of managing Egyptian heritage. Gary has highlighted RC's role in public outreach, creating new jobs and educational opportunities for archaeological students as well as local community members. Significantly, his research, his work, serves to bridge the cultural gap between the wider population and their cultural heritage. He presented a slide which showed how many people that he actually employed. I think he identified a goal of 650, and he actually hired 704 to serve as archaeologists, day laborers, photographers, conservators. And this work was, as he mentioned, funded by USAID. He also mentioned the creation of an interfaith group of young women who serve to serve as docents for the Red Monastery. Both of these are examples of providing job opportunities for local Egyptian people, and clearly is something that we need to continue doing and invest in. So, to conclude, heritage has traditionally been examined in the context of political interests. However, people like Laura Jane Smith and Rodney Harrison are drawing our attention to the importance of considering heritage discourse as a form of human rights. More specifically, it's about the right to define oneself, the community to which one belongs, and the values that that community collectively shares. Non-Western and indigenous scholars have recently critiqued Western archaeologists, anthropologists, and historians, as well as museum curators, for their neglect of indigenous agency and local politics. They've also challenged the universalizing tendencies of the World Heritage Convention for failing to incorporate culturally relevant concepts of heritage. They've questioned the focus on the material, artifacts and monuments, at the expense of the immaterial and intangible forms of heritage, language, dance, and song. So I think we can all agree that all of these concerns need to be taken into consideration today if heritage discourse is to become more democratic. From this perspective, heritage should no longer be considered a thing or a property, but rather a verb. Heritaging is thus the ongoing process of negotiating social meanings and practice with respect to signs of the past and traversing the boundaries embodied in static formulations of global, national, and local community character. Thank you.
Thank you. We're running a little bit behind schedule, but I think we do have time for about 10 minutes of discussion, so I'd like to open the floor for that. Yes?
Well, I think Bob addressed this to a certain extent, but both the speakers are concerned with instilling in the Egyptian people some sense of appreciation for their ancient heritage. And Jerry contrasted the situation in Greece and Italy, where those countries have reconciled their ancient heritage, pagan heritage, if you will, with the Christian heritage, and there's really no problem there. And I'm wondering what the solution is for Egypt. I think, fortunately, Egypt doesn't have the kind of fanatic anti-antiquity that we found in Afghanistan with the blowing up the statues. But I think there's just, they don't care. It's irrelevant to a lot of the fundamentalist Muslims for whom history starts in, 598 or whatever. So I'm just wondering what specific steps you would recommend to try and raise the consciousness of the general public in Egypt and an appreciation for their ancient past.
Monica?
Well, I think people cannot appreciate something they don't know about. I want you to tell me how many books in Arabic were published academically. You'll find everything stopped with Salim Hassan in the 1950s. So how can you imagine people who have no access to the information and also used to have no access to the site? The Giza Plateau would be closed on Sham el-Nassim for Egyptians in favor of tourists. So how can you appreciate something you've never read about? You have no access to the knowledge. So the key is if you publish books in Arabic, they will understand, and you do not need to dumb them down, as Neil said this morning. They just totally, as you publish here for the West, you need to publish in Arabic for the Egyptians. It's very simple.
Me too.
Yeah, I completely agree. And to continue with that, this conversation of cultural heritage and local alienation from the past connects nicely to the digital humanities discussion. But is it not problematic that the widest dissemination of information is primarily in English or Western languages? Because this not only limits access to Western audiences or those with a Western education, but it also implicitly makes preservation of the past a Western project. And that I would think that would exacerbate local alienation from their past. So it's great that we can train people on the ground in Arabic, but it seems disingenuous to say, oh, the people don't have an interest in their past, or et cetera, when us as Westerners talk about democratizing knowledge and the role of digital humanities in democratizing knowledge, and yet we're at least don't seem to have a priority on widely disseminating knowledge in local languages. Now, I know that the governments might censor access to the web pages, but at the very least, it seems like it would be a meaningful symbolic gesture to have this historical knowledge widely distributed in local languages.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Can I just say, Monica, how incredibly courageous you are, and not just for like physically putting yourself in a museum and hiding away a papyrus, but for your critiques actually of the Ministry of Antiquities and what's going on, because that in itself is a huge step to be taken by someone who's actually working in the Egyptian Academy. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about what space there is for Egyptian academics to make those kinds of critiques of their own government.
Well, I think when I first started, I just found that there was a gap. The Western scholars were too scared to lose their permits. The Egyptian colleagues were too scared. They were not empowered to talk. So there was this gap that I think, as being Egyptian and educated in the West, I could fill. I think, and back then, I think the state of the political fluidity at that time, I think, gave that space. And I think if you speak to the public, and if you speak really genuinely out of the goodwill for people, respect you, and this creates public opinion. And when you have public opinion backing you up, the ministry then respects you. At the beginning, they would not listen to us. I remember once a previous minister came out and said, "Oh, she does not have a PhD in archaeology. She should not talk about archaeology," which I do. But you see, they start attacking you personally instead of responding to the claims. And thank God, I have a very good support system. We have around 500 inspectors working with us at the task force. So with that support of knowing that you're doing this for the next, and I remember one of the good professors that taught me once called me and told me, "Monica, you're never going to get a job. You've ruined your academic career." And I told her, "Well, I don't care. I've preserved my integrity." And I could really feel it, that I would not be able to face my students one day and tell them we did everything that we could to save these sites, while we didn't. So, well, what I did actually gained enough public support that I was nominated for the Minister of Antiquities 3 times and turned it down because I'm wise enough not to accept the position. Still, at first time I was even pregnant in 6 months. And now even the military generals, they call me when they need to, there was a problem in Tel Hebwa 3, that they were ceding Tel Hebwa, which is the military gate to Egypt, they were ceding this site, the 4 locals from Ismailia. And when the ministry made claims, the first person that the military generals called me, they said, "We know that you're going to say the right thing. Is it really an archaeological site?" And I said, "Yes, it is an archaeological site. Although it's registered, but there was a problem with the paperwork." So we've gained this status. I was even received by the previous president, Adli Mansour, twice. People now listen to us. They know that we're not talking out of spite. We're not talking, we have documented everything. We use satellite images, as you've seen. We use photographs. So in a way, we've gained an independent position in Egypt, that people now, when the ministry says something, during the disaster of the Tutankhamun beard, for example, people were turning for us. I mean, is it true? Is it true? They would not. They would dismiss the claims by the Ministry of Antiquities then, because they knew that since 2011 we've been out in the field and doing this. So we've gained a credibility within the Egyptian society, and I think this has given us the edge to continue the fight.
Matt.
I just want to echo Ian's praise of very courageous work that you're doing, so thank you very much for your presentation. But my question is kind of rooted in what Bob was just mentioning about Lynn Meskel and Rodney Harrison's recent work about heritage being about human rights. So particularly about the last slide that you showed about what we can do, it seems that heritage discourse is attacking the symptom rather than the actual disease. And the disease is clearly rooted in social inequities. I mean, if you look at a landfill on an archaeological site, that clearly deals with a global health crisis. We're dealing with social inequalities in drastic levels. So if we're just talking about knowledge about heritage and archaeological sites, is that just treating a symptom rather than the underlying disease itself?
Well, yes, and I definitely agree that it has to do a lot with social equality. And for example, in 2006, I started a project in Sarabit al-Khedem where all what we did was train the Bedouins to become tour guides for the area, because we thought that it's the Bedouins who should show the site to the people. And The problem, again, it has to do, Yani, with all due respect to the people in the room, with Western ideology of archaeological sites. Unfortunately, many Western scholars still want to come with a colonial cask and tell people what to do. I've worked on excavations many times, and on very few incidents, that the chief excavator actually explained to the workers what they were excavating. They just used them as the number for their daily wage. So there is a huge gap. I think that the Western intervention needs to completely change. And I think the future will not allow any more such post-colonial and post-colonial mentalities. And of course, this fits totally with equality of rights.
Just a quick follow-up to that is, in terminology, in terms of the colonial discourse and how it still operates, do local children identify themselves as looters?
No, they do not think that actually looting is a crime. They identify themselves as treasure hunters. They would say, their mothers would say they're finding enough money for their school supplies.
Okay, I think in that case we should probably move on to our concluding remarks. Thank you for everybody who participated.
All right, so we're nearing the end of our program, which is quite sad, but it's been a brilliant and productive day, so I suppose we all deserve the drinks that are coming in the reception afterwards. Our closing remarks will briefly take us back to the traditional core of the State of the Field workshops, a chance for us to step back and examine the place of teaching archaeology and Egyptology in North American universities, and how that sits with the new realities of our field as things change politically, geographically, and methodologically. Professor James P. Allen is Charles Edwin Wilbur Professor of Egyptology here at Brown. He received his PhD from the University of Chicago. Before coming to Brown in 2007, he had previously been an epigrapher with the University of Chicago's Epigraphic Survey, Cairo director of the American Research Center in Egypt, and curator of Egyptian art at the Met. From 2008 to 2015, he was president of the International Association of Egyptologists. Professor Allen's research interests include ancient Egyptian grammar and literature, which you may have heard about, religion, and history. He has written extensively on these subjects and is currently working on the publication of material from the Met's excavations at Dashur, a new comprehensive grammar of the ancient Egyptian pyramid texts, and a study of ancient Egyptian religion and thought. Welcome.
Okay, thank you. It's my pleasure to be the token philologist here today. When Jen and Miriam asked me to give the closing remarks, I thought, well, okay, I can come over, show the flag, and kind of put it in a broader perspective. And only after I agreed did I realize that I would have to sit through an entire day of archaeological papers. Never mind. Actually, to my surprise, I found myself interested by the program, engrossed in it, definitely informed by it, and I even enjoyed it. So thank you. I congratulate both of you, actually, for putting together a perceptive and innovative program with the right approach, the right topics, and above all, the right people to make this really a groundbreaking event. So congratulations. As far as my sum up remarks, I'm of course looking at this from a non-archaeological side. And it used to be that archaeology was kind of the poor relative of philology. For literate societies, such as those of ancient Egypt, archaeology was not needed for interpretation, only for discovery, particularly discovery of things that we could read that would tell us more about ancient Egypt, and recovery of architectural remains. And archaeology was only sort of important for those benighted societies that didn't have writing or didn't leave us any written records. And for them, archaeology was kind of the default means of recovering data for want of anything better. Well, obviously that's changed now. And I found this particularly interesting because it touches on something that I've kind of realized for most of my professional life, but really only has come home to me in the past couple of years. And that's the danger of the preconceptions, the unconscious preconceptions that we bring to the data. Let me give you some examples. Egyptian art. People look at Egyptian art and these funny characters and think, these people couldn't draw. How does this compare to the ethereal nature of Greek sculpture, for example? And it's not until we actually began to look at the art from the Egyptian point of view, not from our point of view, and realize that they were perfectly capable of doing things naturalistically, but they weren't interested in doing it naturalistically, at least not in two-dimensional art. Instead, these are symbols. This is symbolic art. How about religion? Compare the finery of Judeo-Christian Islamic theology to animal-headed gods. No comparison. Until you realize these guys didn't worship animal-headed gods. Again, this is a symbol. And not looking at it from the Egyptian point of view has caused us, or had caused us, to misinterpret it. I've been particularly conscious of this in language for the past couple of years, and have come to realize the misinterpretation of the data that we unconsciously cause by imposing on it the categories of our own languages. So we expect to find past, present, and future in a language that didn't care to express past, present, and future in the same way that we do. And it's only by backing out and beginning to try to look at the language from its own point of view that we really begin to understand it. So, what's today been all about? I think it's the same thing in archaeology. We started out with culture, with Stuart, and supported by Neil. We can no longer look at Nubian culture as the barbaric southern relative of the civilized Egyptians who lived in the Nile Valley. Instead, we have to try to look at it, if we want to understand it, from the Nubian point of view, from the Sudanese point of view, and not from the Egyptian point of view or from what we think is the Egyptian point of view. Chronologically, we have to have some kind of framework to talk about things. But unconsciously, the framework has provided boundaries for us. And so we expect to find neat chronological divisions that sometimes the Egyptians themselves created for us when archaeology shows us a different picture altogether. Geographically, we unconsciously, I think of Egypt in modern terms, this square in North Africa, where, of course, for the ancient Egyptians, there was an entirely different view. And to begin to see how the ancient Egyptians interacted with what they themselves did not consider Egypt gives us an entirely different perspective on ancient societies. And finally, methodological. We have to interact with the modern world. We can no longer go and recover our data and spend years putting them in a elephant folio book that winds up on a dusty library shelf. Instead, we have to think of new ways of presenting these not only to scholars and students, but also to the general public. And then what seemed to me the kind of outlier in all of this, which is the political aspect, until I realized that this also is a very good example of how we have to back out or try to back out of the unconscious biases that we bring. We can no longer afford to go to Egypt and dig around in their backyard and find our data and leave without doing something in return for the country that's welcomed us. And I think we've gotten that message very clearly today. And it's something that it's something that we're going to have to remember and act on in the future. So it's been a long day for all of us, not just the philologists, but also the archaeologists. So thank you for giving me these few minutes to kind of wrap up. And again, congratulations to the organizers for putting this all together.
Thank you, Jim. When the philology side says lovely things about archaeology, I feel like at least in the context of Brown itself, the aim has been achieved in many ways. So we realize it's late. We would like to invite all of you, guests and participants, if you wish to participate in a sort of final discussion, to bring thoughts together and to move towards going forwards, which as many of you participants and otherwise have expressed is really one of the things you were excited about in this conference in the first place.
So we still have definitely some time for questions or for some final roundups, and then we'll go to the reception. So any more remarks? Any more questions? Yeah, Betsy?
I want to be really selfish and ask if you'll show that fly-through of the Red Monastery Church that we forgot to turn on earlier.
I will do it. It's so beautiful. Let's see. You are. Is it going?
I think you have to get that.
Nope, that's not. Is this the one?
Yeah, it's actually,
Yeah.
it's
Okay.
back
Oh,
to
I
the
see.
start.
Okay.
I apologize
Okay.
for taking up so much time.
No, it's cool. You want it back at the?
Yeah, thank you very
Yeah,
much.
no worries. I'm excited about it. Feast your eyes while you feed your heads.
Well, just get a little background while we have our discussion.
Sure. Okay. So I'm actually interested in starting a little bit of a discussion about how we can prepare students of Egyptian archaeology who are either in an Egyptology department or a NELC department or an anthro department or an archaeology department for a job market that might require them to have skills in the digital humanities and drawing from other areas. Because this state of the field is sometimes developed into a discussion about how we can better the training for our future archaeologists working in a given region. So I'd really like to hear thoughts from, I guess, primarily professors and graduate students about what kind of training they think would be valuable for them. Yeah.
Well, apologies for taking the floor again, but as an art historian, I don't have the benefits of those of you who are archaeologists working with your students as a matter of course with digital technology. So what I've been doing in my more traditional realm is giving students the opportunity in my seminars of presenting a final research paper at the end of the semester or presenting a digital exhibition. And I've been involving our Digital Scholarship Center and giving training for them. And they're very excited about that because a lot of jobs in art history now, actually most of them, include information about digital humanities experience preferred.
I mean, I will say I rely on students almost entirely in the field to do most of the digital stuff, at least in terms of field work. Not all of my own students in some cases, but so the 3D modeling I've been doing and whatnot. But it is a problem, I agree with you, because nearly everyone who I've asked to serve the roles as surveyor, GIS person, and whatnot has come to me with some of these skills already. I'm not going to take someone who doesn't already know how to do that as my surveyor. And Parker, it's been great having you here. I think you at least can get our students in at the ground floor with GIS from an archaeological perspective. But I think this is a huge problem, in fact, because it's a skill set that you guys are expected to have. And like I'm only half a generation older than you are, and I don't know these things myself. So I can't teach you.
I mean, one of the places where it's happening institutionally, and certainly here at Brown, is in the library. But also in things like our Granoff Center, they're doing some things, computational mathematics, right? So there are connections, and many universities are already building these centers for digital scholarship. Maybe they're library attached, maybe they're attached to a humanities center. It really depends, but yeah, increasingly, you're not going to know how to do the programming in R, and God knows what else my technologist colleagues in the library do. But that's why you have to collaborate and at least know who are the specialists that you need in order to get a digital project off the ground.
I think you can always also encourage interdisciplinary research. This is what we plan to do for the new university in Aswan. We're going to have interdisciplinary research between computer science and the archaeology department, and we're creating a heritage technology lab, especially for that with remote sensing equipment, 3D scanners, and the architecture students will work with us also with the 3D scanners and a GIS lab. So I think this makes all three parties happy, the architecture, the computer scientists, and the archaeology students.
I think that's really important for the sort of high-level development of technological tools in particular. But what I worry about our students falling through the cracks, for instance, are you need to know how to use these tools at a higher level than perhaps some of your professors do, but you don't need to be developing them. And where do we get the people who aren't going to be writing the software but need to be able to use GIS?
I'd also suggest that the infrastructure has to change, and so before an upcoming grad student decides, I'm going to put a lot of my time into developing these skills, I have to know that the output is going to be accepted in, say, a tenure track program. A website as opposed to a published article, is that going to have the same street cred and go on my resume and mean something? And then the other thing is the upcoming grad student has to think very carefully, if I'm going to invest all this time in digital humanities, that time has to come from somewhere. So does that mean I'm not doing late Egyptian, or I'm not doing some of these traditional offerings? And so where's the balance? What am I going to give up in order to gain these new skills? And can we bless that and make sure that that's okay? Do we have to redefine what a traditional archaeological or Egyptological program is going to teach?
I think that sort of interdisciplinary element is really crucial. That's what it's all about. It's changing your mindset. It's not sort of, I'm going to do Egyptology or classical archaeology, and that's just it. You need to sort of come to it as an archaeologist or as a sort of student of that ancient culture or so, and then just draw on all those relationships. Because on the one hand, I also think the technology, all that sense, it's so much become a specialism. There's no way you can deal with all the specialisms. You can do that, but who's going to deal with the archaeozoology, and who's going to deal with the geoarchaeology? So there's no in that sense, you can't put together a program that covers all the specialisms and sort of, or expect, well, you could do a program, but you can't expect everybody to take all those programs on board. So field work is crucial, going out into the field, and that should be an integral part of all those programs. And sort of, well, certainly here it is, and that is crucial because even if you don't do it yourself, you see others doing it, and you pick up something of it, and you get an idea this can be done. And the digital element is sort of, in that sense, different from zoology and so on, that it sort of pervades sort of many more elements, and sort of to respond directly to that point about recognition or so. Certainly here in this university, that is now the case, that digital publications, as long as they are reviewed and so on, that they are recognized. It's not a problem. No, I'm actually in the process of, well, I should have this weekend or next week, we're reviewing our standards for the Institute to sort of explicitly write that in. That's sort of a policy here, which over the last few months or so has been changed. So I think all that is coming, and that's just a matter of time, how long it takes for things to. But what's really important, the digital element is in a way sort of the minor element. So when you want to judge it, it's peer reviewed, there's a quality there, and it doesn't matter whether it's printed on vellum or sort of out there on the web.
Delicate, you've been.
Well, one of the things about collaboration is that the relationships change a lot. I mean, you say as a professor, I don't have all that knowledge. You say nobody can have all that knowledge, and it's all true. The relationship between students, faculty, and staff is changing dramatically. We're at equal level, collaborating on projects, getting things done. So that whole social contract changes. It's really important that the senior scholars take the lead in this and really think through what it means. Yes, quality is essential. I always call it GIGA, garbage in, garbage out. If you don't have quality research that analyze these projects, then there's really, it looks glitzy, but it doesn't mean a thing. So it's really a matter of training the people who do the review. Those are usually, usually it's Professor Step 6 and over. I don't have the same system here. But these are people who are not typically haven't grown up with collaborative work or with technology. And I think the collaborative aspect is even more important than the technology. The moment you publish in archaeology, and even in archaeology it's not that explicit, you need to make explicit what was your contribution to an article with 8 collaborators. What is your contribution to a project with 20 collaborators? Some people put more in it than others. And then there's also the question, as archaeologists, we're supposed to just know how to do things. We don't get lessons in using a total station or a differential GPS or a 3D scanner. Those are all things that we're supposed to learn in the field. So there's a large part of apprenticeship to archaeology that doesn't really get recognized either. So there's more than just the digital that's at play.
And I would, if I can continue on that, that collaborative aspect is sort of doubly important in the light of particularly the last session that we heard, because it should not just be the senior faculty and the students from those universities, but also sort of local collaborators and the local communities. That sort of all has to be sort of rolled into one, working with local archaeologists, sort of, as we saw a little bit in the RC work with the conservators, but it should be just, as it is in other parts of the Mediterranean, other parts of the world, should be local, sort of regular practice that you work with local archaeology students, but also sort of just local people from the village who would be interested in that kind of things. We've taken to work on a project, particularly make sure that we work in the weekends, so that in the weekends when people are off, that they can actually come and see on site and have easier access, and that sort of recognizing that you're part of a wider world and you're not just sitting in your ivory tower is.
But currently,
it's so
that's
simple
the
to
privilege
say,
of the
but
tenured. Currently, that's the privilege of the tenured, because there is no mechanism. Even if you say, "Oh, well, we're going to recognize peer-reviewed digital publications in the same way we recognize print publications," that's still the same type of outcome. It's just a different means of of dissemination, right? How are you going to recognize the effort that it takes and the good to the field that it does to have someone engage in a collaborative project of getting the community involved in saving a site? That it's just as much effort as writing an article, but the outcome is really different and cannot be judged in the way that we have usually judged things as a marker towards tenure, which is frankly what I think we're all going for.
The College Art Association has established a committee to create a set of standards with detailed information and also a kind of chart to enable people to evaluate something in print versus something digitally. And I wonder if one of your institutions might do the same thing for archaeology and Egyptology.
Yeah, so I can't remember which organization it was. I think it's the AAUP, American Association of University Professors, has recommended, and it came through the national academies, this inclusive view of scholarship. And I know at least at our institution and a number of other large research institutions in the West, that's been adopted formally in tenure considerations, that it's not just, is it a digital product? I mean, it includes things like live performances and all of these other things that matter in our contributions, but how do you quantify them with a impact score of the journal and how many people have cited it, even if they said you were an idiot? You know, I mean, that's still 20 citations in their opinion. And they count the same as if they said you were brilliant in those kind of calculations. So.
There's also a big change happening on the level of public engagement and involvement in American national funding. So like the NEA and NEH have completely overhauled their grant system now, and there's so much focus on public and community engagement built into that. So even the scope of funding, in order to get a project, you're going to have to, that's being enforced now, which I think is a very big positive.
One other thing, and this goes back to the structure of the programs, is language training. And having Arabic, it's elephant in the room, right? It's having Egyptian Arabic count in these graduate programs. Sometimes it's difficult. I know at UCLA we have a fall season, and we would miss the first quarter of Arabic, and you'd have to come back and catch up, basically. Like you'd end up doing the class there. And then you were expected to do German, French, the ancient languages, and Arabic. It counts more. Again, our program was split between NELC and archaeology, and in archaeology there were a lot more people doing the Arabic exam. But especially when it comes to the cultural heritage side of things, I think that's something we can't ignore anymore.
It isn't, and I think
and we're not. Sorry. Yes.
We are such a monolingual society. This is going to be hard. Oh, the Europeans are all.
Yeah, as European,
which
language do you want me to I want to go back to Hannah, because I actually tried to set up a community project in Fayoum. I was stopped by the by the ministry.
I know.
Because it was too dangerous. I tried to train students. I wasn't allowed. But I did many field school for inspectors, which are extremely useful. So I'm not complaining, but I've just started working in Ethiopia, and there I can work with students that actually go out to the schools. So we're starting this whole community project with Ethiopian colleagues, and it's something that also needs to change in Egypt. So how are we going to do that? Because again, it would be really neo-colonialist if we are going to tell the Egyptian ministry, for you should do A, B, or C.
We're trying to push them to do that, because even I remember when I spoke with Kent Weeks, when I complained to him that the signs in the Valley of the Kings are written only in English. What kind of message is this giving to the Egyptian public? He told me it was the Ministry of Antiquities who insisted that the signs would be written in English. It's post-colonialism by the book. Yes, we have to change this. And I think the current minister is very open to such initiatives. And I think through employing locals to do the part of speaking with the community, this will be more successful, because they can overcome the language barrier, they are more accessible, and even for ethnographic purposes, if you need to document the social history of archaeological sites, I suggest best would be training locals to do the job and then doing it. I used to do the same when I was in Kharga as an undergraduate student with Salim. I would go to the villages and speak about pigeon rearing because we had a pigeon tower and we wanted to understand the dynamics of pigeon raising. So I think, and it worked very well because people would accept a local person who can speak Arabic, who's easy, who can maneuver children very well. So I think it's, yeah, it requires a bit of maneuvering, and with proper pressure on the ministry from us and from you as well, I think this barrier will be broken.
And I also want to say that I would love to translate all the articles in Encyclopedia in Arabic. We now only do the abstract.
Yeah.
The trouble is, if two people look at the Arabic, nobody can agree what is good Arabic. So, but it's so expensive. So it's just something that we need to find funding for one way or another. So it's.
Yes, I think maybe the USA.
I know, I was just thinking that. Gary.
Or it needs to be a mandate from the funding agencies. That if you get funding, like just as now NSF is saying, mandating you have to put your data in a digital repository, they'll have to mandate that your scholarship be also translated into the local language.
But mandated and funded.
Yeah, yeah, but you know, most mandates are unfunded mandates, at least in this one.
If you go to the Diwan bookshop, which is the most famous bookshop in Cairo, you would not find a single book in Arabic about ancient Egypt.
On the depressing note.
Yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to say. Stuart, maybe a little bit.
Maybe a little more uplifting here. In Sudan, like in Ethiopia, this isn't a problem that we're actually encouraged to engage. And I think, and that's something I've thought about, and you know, I've shifted my view from, you know, just kind of going in and doing the work, but increasingly, and going back a few years, we've tried to engage with the people that we hire. And, you know, explaining to them what we're doing, but also not just technically, but also, you know, sort of what we're finding and what it says about things. And then Michelle and I both have been giving lectures to different groups, men and women, because they're, you know, works a little better if it's segregated given the local society. But Michelle went out to the local school as well, and like Neil, we're preparing, you know, materials in Arabic. And actually that idea of having a video in Nubian is really good, and I think we'll try that too, because of course Nubian is the first language in our area, not Arabic is the sort of second language, kind of the lingua franca. But I think that's something that we all should be doing more of. I absolutely agree with that, and that's something that's worthwhile, I think, regardless of the tenure clock or whatever, and I think
it's worthwhile. I was not trying to argue against the
yeah. But also I think all of these kind of things too. I mean, we like to think in those absolute calculus, you know, of, you know, does it count towards tenure or whatever, but there's also a calculus of what sets you apart from the rest of the people competing for a position. And I think if you've shown that you're engaging in these kinds of activities, I think that will potentially, you know, impress a search committee that's looking to fill a position. If you acquire one of these skills, and not acquire the skill just to say, oh yeah, I can do GIS, but you know, with a goal in mind. So yeah, you're not going to be able to do every technical thing, but find one thing, apply it well, and that gives you something to talk about with people when you go in for a job interview. And again, interdisciplinarity. I mean, I was trained both as an Egyptologist and in anthropological archaeology, and I'm in an anthropology department. And I got that way because I could talk across disciplines. And you know, a lot of Egyptologists have gotten positions in, you know, there aren't that many Egyptology departments, right? So a lot of Egyptologists have gotten positions in history departments, art history, and so on, because they can talk across those disciplinary boundaries.
And I think that's clearly a boundary that has been broken within Egyptian archaeology. If you look at who's here today, in fact, and where our students are going, that we are not just, we are Penn and Chicago and Brown, but we're not just the places that have traditionally taught it. Yeah.
Well, as someone who's recently transfer from being student to faculty, I can say you are asked a lot about, and like Stuart was saying, search committees are always asking about engagement and looking for that as a kind of a new model, at least in my personal experience, so that sort of sea change has happened.
Let us hope that university tenure committees also put that on board, not just the hiring committees within departments, because it's an awesome thing.
I think that is a much better closing comment. And on behalf of my two co-organizers here, we would really like to thank you again for coming from near and far and making this a fantastic workshop and event. We're very grateful for the great introductions, for the great papers, and also for the great discussions. And again, thanks to Jim for those very rounded off closing notes. Before we all have our first wine, there's definitely one person who is always acting in the background, but who made this actually possible, who brought all the people here, and who's organizing all the wonderful receptions and dinners. And this is Jess Porter, our logistics manager.